Hello everyone. One of the things we have seen was that Columbus and Cortez were portrayed as the founders of a sort of neo-Roman empire. In previous episodes, we have seen how Columbus's contemporaries portrayed him as a sort of neo-Aeneas founding a new Roman empire, not on the Italian peninsula, but on a supposedly brand new world. We also saw how he and Cortez were frequently portrayed as agents of God. Like Columbus, Cortez was also portrayed as a sort of reincarnation of the classical Greek hero Aeneas. But these were not isolated incidents. In fact, you might argue that this was a sort of feature of Spanish culture at this point in history. Let's take, for example, Francisco López de Gomara. He served as a chaplain in Cortez's expedition to the Aztec capital. He was also a historian. And in his 1552 history book, he glorified the then Spanish Emperor Charles V, giving him the titles, quote, Emperor of the Romans, King of Spain, Lord of the Indies, and the New World. But this was not an isolated incident. In his lifetime, Charles V cultivated these comparisons to classical history. The reason why Charles V felt entitled to revive the glory of the classical eras was because he derived from several traditions which linked themselves back into the ancient past. One of these legacies was the lineage of Charles V. Charles V was a Habsburg, a very powerful dynasty in Europe, and his own grandfather was Maximilian I, a Habsburg emperor, but also an emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, which roughly corresponds to modern-day Germany. And Maximilian I was crowned as King of the Germans, and Maximilian I was not only king of the Holy Roman Empire, one of his titles was King of the Romans. The thinking went that Roman Emperor Augustus I, as emperor, created an institution. He created an office. And that office was the emperorship of the Holy Roman Emperors, the same sort of Roman-created office which Maximilian I ascended into. This claim was also bolstered by the fact that Maximilian I was married to Mary of Burgundy. And Mary of Burgundy was a direct descendant of Charlemagne. Charlemagne, who is sometimes referred to as the father of Europe. But important for Charlemagne is that Charlemagne was crowned as Holy Roman Emperor in the year 800. And this was the first time anyone had been crowned as a Roman Emperor in several centuries at least since the fall of the western provinces of the Roman Empire. When Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne as a Holy Roman Emperor, he deliberately attempted to revive the Roman Empire, centuries after it had supposedly fallen. Now, it is often said that the Holy Roman Empire was neither holy, nor Roman, nor an empire. But that is not at all what the Habsburg nobility and Habsburg propagandists would say. They would say it was indeed holy, it was indeed Roman, and it was indeed an empire. But it was not a political structure like the old Roman Empire. This was a metaphysical Roman Empire in practices and beliefs, particularly the belief in Christianity. This was a sort of Augustinian city of God being made real, manifesting itself in a new office, the office of the Holy Roman Emperor, a spiritual successor, one that shared the beliefs and practices of the past imperial form. And that's the perspective we're gonna take because, sure, the Holy Roman Empire was a sort of Germanic offshoot that tried to claim lineage to the old Roman Empire. But from the perspective of the Habsburg, from the perspectives of their propaganda campaign, they literally portrayed themselves as a continuation of the Holy Roman Empire. And that's why we're gonna double down on this perspective of continuity with the past, not because it's accurate, but because that gives us an accurate view of the propagandists who portrayed and amplified this message. So Charles V portrayed himself as a revived Roman emperor, partially because of his Habsburg descent. The other reason why he was able to portray himself as a neo-Roman emperor was because of his Spanish side. Charles V's mother was Joanna of Castile, the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, the daughter of the monarchs who finished the Reconquista and who united Spain under Catholic rule. Keep in mind that these were the monarchs who presided over the triumph of Christianity and glorified the fact that they had restored an ancient, long-lost Roman province. Indeed, Spain had long lived in the shadow of the Roman Empire. Just look at the layout of some cities. Just look at the design of both public and private buildings. These all bore traces of Roman heritage, of a Roman past. People in the lifetime of Charles V continued to walk on roads that the Romans themselves built. They routinely passed Roman ruins which had stood the test of time. This is not to deny the pervasive Islamic influence and legacy in Spain, but the Spanish Catholics basically ignored that and emphasized and doubled down on the Roman Christian heritage. Moreover, the Spanish elite continued the language of the Romans, Latin, going to these elite institutions and learning how to read and write in Latin, the old language. Another part of elite education was the same education that elites in Roman times received, particularly, for example, rhetoric. Although this would not have been the same rhetoric, although it bore the same name, it was deviated from its classical roots and heavily Christianized. And Charles V cultivated this tradition whenever he became emperor in 1516. Whenever he entered another European city, for example, he staged pageants, had people wear costumes, used iconography, and promoted speeches that all linked contemporary Spanish history to the history of the Romans. Charles V was also frequently portrayed as a Roman. He was frequently portrayed as a Roman imperator, wearing antique armor and having his head crowned not by a crown, but by laurels, as in the fashion of the old Roman emperors. But such parades were not only limited to the cities in Europe. Such classically inspired themes were also evident in Mexico, whereupon after visiting France, he threw an elaborate festival in 1539 to illustrate these links. And the Spanish writer Bernal Diaz, he noted that the festival was marked by games, quote, like those they used to perform in Rome when the consuls and captains who had won battles used to enter in triumph. In the American hemisphere and in Europe, throughout his entire empire, Charles V hammered down the same message. I am a new Roman Empire, and this is not simply a Spanish empire, but a revived neo-Roman empire. And so Charles V not only placed his empire in the context of ancient history, but he also put it in the context of legends and mythology. Let's take, for example, the Spanish historian Diego de Valera. Valera rooted Spain's history in the myths and legends of classical antiquity, particularly when it came to Hercules. Yes, the demigod Hercules. The Hercules who was famous for his trials and labors and fights against monsters. The Hercules who completed such heroic tasks such as slaying the Nemean lion, killing the nine-headed Lernaean hydra, capturing the Cyrenian hind, also capturing the Erymanthian boar, cleaning the Augean stables in a single day, killing the Stymphalian birds, capturing the Cretan bull, stealing the mares of Diomedes, acquiring the girdle of Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons, also obtaining the cattle of the three-bodied giant Geryon, stealing the 3 golden apples of Hesperides, but also capturing and bringing back Cerberus, the guardian of hell. That's Hercules. Now, according to Diego de Valera, you have the story of Noah's Ark, humanity is flooded, and you have people suddenly appear in Spain. At some unknown point in history, Hercules shows up, but he's not alone. He brings a fleet of 12 ships to Spain filled with noble peoples. at the Strait of Gibraltar. Hercules orders the construction of 2 pillars. Valletta claimed that Hercules found Gerion's cattle in Sevilla and Merida. In Valletta's history, Hercules left the Roman ruins in Spain. And in Valletta's history, Hercules established the boundaries of the known world. Once Hercules left with Gerion's cattle, Hercules installed his nephew as ruler of Hispania, his nephew being named Hispan. And Valletta rewrote ancient mythology to link the legends and mythos of ancient Greece to his modern-day Spain. He was bringing these 2 civilizations and cultures together in a way that had never been before. According to Valletta, Hercules' building program in Spain happened before the Trojan War, happened before Rome. The Roman ruins were put there in Spain before Rome was even an empire. And of course, he did not invent all this up himself. Valletta followed in the footsteps of other previous Spanish writers who claimed that the Spanish monarchs of Ferdinand and Isabella were direct descendants of the demigod Hercules. Thus, the rulers of Castile could portray themselves as a stable leadership that had been there since ancient times. They were not establishing a new nation of Spain, no. They were simply reclaiming an ancient 1,000-year-old throne. Now let's go a little bit back to the Strait of Gibraltar. Hercules ordered the construction of 2 pillars at this site to mark the boundary of the known world. At this site, the Latin phrase non plus ultra was inscribed here. Non plus ultra translates to not further beyond. As in, there is nothing beyond this point. This is the end of the world. This is the edge of the world. Now, part of Charles V's revitalization of the Roman Empire and drawing these connections to the past was him taking the iconography and figure of Hercules for himself. We could see this imagery in the dress shield of Charles V. Now, according to Valletta, it was Hercules who installed the pillars at the Strait of Gibraltar. But if you look, that is not Hercules. That is Charles V. And he is not installing the pillars at the Strait of Gibraltar. Because if you look at the words, it says plus ultra, which means further beyond. Charles V is not marking the point where the world ends. Charles V is literally uprooting the pillars that Hercules installed and is venturing forth into the unknown world with the pillars to signify that Spain is going beyond what the Greeks and Romans could ever dream of. Instead of nothing beyond this point, eternal expansion, expansion without end, expansion into the unknown. There would be no stop. This was to signify that Charles V was not simply restoring the Roman Empire, but building a renewed, revindicated neo-Roman Empire. He was building a world empire that the Romans could never even dream of. And this is imagery and symbolism which survives on the Spanish flag to this very day. And we could see this newly fashioned mythology in the work of another Spanish author, in Miguel de Urzúrum. He claimed that Charles V was indeed the emperor of the world because of his claim to being emperor of the Romans. That is, Charles V's Roman heritage legitimized his claim to world leadership. And furthermore, he also claimed that Charles V's Roman imperial authority must be extended throughout the world so that all the unbelievers may be brought to Christ and all the barbarians may be civilized. And so this was the worldview of Charles V, along with the numerous Spanish conquistadors which settled and colonized and conquered the American hemisphere. This was the worldview. This was where they were coming from. This idea of building a worldwide empire that reflected the very best of their ancestors, the Romans.